Coming up on Over a Barrel, we have a lot of things to discuss. Everything from a potential attack with Iran toward Israel, the Dow Jones Industrial going down, crude oil going down in price. We've got a little bit of everything. And oh, by the way, there was a hurricane that hit Florida. All of that and a whole lot more right here on Over a Barrel, which starts right now. Welcome to Over a Barrel. I'm your co-host, Matt McLean. He's Patrick DeHaan. Patrick, I have screens all around me right now, looking around at all the different things. I'm seeing crude oil prices drop. I'm seeing the Wall Street Dow Jones Industrial dropping a lot of points. It's not looking good in that regard. But before we get into all of that, make sure you like, subscribe to the channel, to all the podcasts, depending upon if you're listening or watching. We, of course, if you are on Spotify and other aspects, you can obviously watch us as well. I mean, you know, it's something. Yeah, he zooms in on me at that particular point in time. I appreciate that. How are you doing today, Patrick?
Well, Matt, I've been trying not to check my 401k. A little bit of a sell-off today. That jobs report last week was really a doozy. And combined with all the overseas markets plummeting, oil prices were down at one point today, around $72 a barrel. We did see a big, a bit of a dip below $73, but yeah, you know, this is just one of those days where economic data isn't looking good, and that's what's behind the big drop in oil today. For those keeping track at home at your local gas pump, the news is pretty good there, Matt. Gas prices have been on the decline. We're down about 5 cents from last week. The national average now getting close to its lowest level since June. $3.45 a gallon, the current tally. And good news, Matt, for most Americans listening or watching to us today, we're going to see a week in which gas prices should be falling across a majority of the country. And keep in mind, too, last year at this time, gas prices were actively spiking. That was due to a big heat wave in much of the country a year ago, as well as refinery outages that happened as a result in both the West Coast and the Corn Belt. So without that likely to happen again this year, Americans now collectively spending about $125 million less on gasoline every day
Every
than a
day?
year ago. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That'll buy some extra ice cream sundaes, let me tell you. That's
a good way to survive the heat wave, by the way, is an ice cream sundae. And now you've made me really crave ice cream instead of talking about gasoline. But you know, Matt, we've talked about the Great Lakes and refinery issues here, as you mentioned in the lead-in. Also, Hurricane Debbie, which has now been reduced to a tropical storm and eventually a depression, dropping buckets of rain. Again, Debbie, you know, I get this question a lot whenever there's a storm. Why isn't Debbie making an impact? Well, as you and I know, and hopefully a lot of folks listening and watching know, that there aren't really any refineries in the way of Hurricane Debbie or what's now Tropical Storm Debbie. There is a refinery that was operating in Savannah, Georgia, but that refinery was essentially just a asphalt refinery. I'm trying to think, you know, if that refinery may even have been shut down. It was a pretty small facility, but by and large, again, you know, a lot of now, as we mentioned, a lot of ports across Florida have closed. But with a lot of people hunkering down, Matt, those port closures do not really have much meaning at this point. I believe Port Tampa was closed. Port Condition Zulu, which is meaning that no ships can come in or out. I think a couple of other ports were operating under Yankee, which means ships can leave, but they cannot arrive. So that's kind of the mess behind it. Is keep in mind, Florida, most gasoline in Florida is coming through those ports on barges. But again, this storm, it was at most a weak Category 1 hurricane. So good news there, Matt, right?
You know, I was speaking with a friend of mine. He's a meteorologist at the Fox affiliate in Tampa, and a chief meteorologist there. And, you know, he was indicating this is actually among the top as far as damaging storms for the Tampa Bay area, even though it was a tropical storm and it was, you know, 65, 70 miles offshore. The quantity of rain that was received and the flooding has created a lot of problems all throughout the Tampa Bay region, for example. In fact, there are cruise ships that leave also the port of Tampa, and they are still out in the Gulf waiting to come back in So that has created some issues, obviously, with the next cruise that was supposed to go out. Well, that's not happening yet because
It's
the
interesting you
current
mentioned
cruise
that.
folks are still on there.
Did you see the video of the Sunshine Skyway swaying in the
I did.
yeah,
I
there were some interesting videos of that massive bridge. My wife is terrified driving over it, and I'm
I
sure
have
she's not alone.
I have driven
Seeing
over
that
that
thing
bridge many
sway back
times.
and forth and the waves break over, so Tampa got it pretty rough, but
Yeah, and
thankfully,
there are the bay bridges, if you will. So most of those were closed for the majority
yeah.
of the day, and the Howard Franklin, which for those of you in the Bay Area, you'll know exactly what that is. But for everyone else, that's the I-275 bridge that goes across the Bay waters and connects St. Petersburg with the city of Tampa.
Matt's going to
It's
go back to some of his Tampa knowledge here.
it's closed
I
because
saw some
part
of those waves going over.
well, part of the road has washed out. So it's closed indefinitely right now, which is a huge artery in the Bay Area that obviously creates, I mean, that's like the Kennedy being closed down in downtown Chicago
Now,
and in the
and keep
Loop
in
area.
mind when you mention
It's a
an
big deal.
artery like that, keep in mind that a lot of gasoline does come from Port Tampa and then it has to travel over some of these
Yep.
bridges. So the good news is, we'll have to keep an eye on this, but there's a couple bridges that you can cross Tampa with. So, but this again, infrastructure and it being shut down plays a critical role, whether it's power outages and trying to route around like trees, down roads, closed bridges. It can be problematic. The only good news, I suppose, Matt, is that the storm itself is not something that shut down again because there's no
No.
refineries in Florida. There's
Hard to
only
shut down a
pipelines.
refinery that's not there, right?
Yeah, that's right. So getting back to that, not a whole lot of worry on prices there. When we zoom back and we talk about the country individually, state by state, Matt, we've seen, and look at this, all the top 20 movements, I guess two of the top 20 largest changes were increases. The rest of them decreases. Florida, you saw a price cycle that happened. That's why prices are showing up 8 cents because we got that price cycle last week. Prices jumped up to 349, but now they're starting to inch down. So, and look at the rest of this, Matt. The Great Lakes seeing some relief. Those refineries are getting back online. So the Great Lakes, good news there. And really for everyone else, Matt, everyone, a lot of decreases here in the last week. That's the trend that should continue. Now, as you mentioned in the lead in as well, violence in the Middle East, that is a threat. We'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, as of the time of this recording, we have received word that President Biden has made his way to the Situation Room in the White House. And we are also, according to the Wall Street Journal, Iran has warned pilots to avoid airspace.
I did see that.
That is, listen, I mean, we're not here to hype anything up or place any fear inside of anybody, but I mean, it is what it is at this
That's not
particular
something you
point.
like to see.
No, it's not. And so the question mark that I have, and the reason why I am bringing it up is, back in April, um, basically Iran was basically saving face and saying, "Hey, wink, wink, we're going to launch a bunch of old missiles, toward Israel, and you guys are probably going to shoot them down. Wink, wink. We just got to save face with the general population inside Iran." I don't get that sense this time. And I just genuinely don't. I think this is a little bit of a different situation. The question mark that I have for you, Patrick, is could this impact oil prices and gas prices? And if so, by how much?
Well, sure. We don't know at this point, but absolutely, Iran is a major oil producer. One of the top 10 globally. So, potentially, now keep in mind, Iran probably does not want to destabilize the entire region, but they do want retribution against these Israel attacks on Hamas and Hezbollah. So, we'll have to see what exactly happens, Matt, if Iran over responds potentially, right? If the degree of response is more significant than Israel's attack, I think that is what could shock the markets. But there's a pretty wide range of possibility. Now, the complicating factor, Matt, is this is happening right after the U.S. is seeing a big sell-off in stocks, right? So there's
Mhm.
kind of competing factors right now, if you will. On the bullish side, pulling things up would be the Middle East. That is a potential bullish factor. The bearish factor on the other side would be the U.S. economy and the broader global economy, because kind of as goes the U.S., as goes other countries. So, carefully monitoring, right? A lot of world and global indices, stock markets were selling off overnight, down 5 to 7%. US stock markets were seeing a pretty big reckoning too. So that is a potential bearish factor that could potentially mitigate or offset any part of the risk from the Middle East. So there's a wide range of possible. Matt, you and I, neither of us have a crystal ball. I don't know about you. If
No.
I did, I'd probably be in the Pacific. Although if I was, you probably wouldn't notice with my background. Maybe I would change it to some palm trees. But all in all, yeah, I mean, and then the hurricane wild card, which we've hit on almost every episode. It feels like Hurricane Debbie was not a major storm. There's another area of interest out in the tropics right now, but for now, according to the National Hurricane Center, just a 30% chance of anything forming over the next week for that particular storm. So, I mean, we're kind of still about 3 weeks away from the start of the peak of hurricane season. So we're still a little ways off.
Yeah, and obviously, the National Hurricane Center has made comments and they are standing by their comments. They reiterated their comments. They updated their comments to look basically like it had looked from moment one. They are indicating this is, in their view, going to be potentially a record-breaking hurricane season.
Yeah.
That is something to be very, very watchful over as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of plates spinning in the air, so to speak, at this particular point on basically just about any direction you can look at. There's something that could drag the price of oil up, down, or sideways at this particular point. And it's not every day that you have so many potential plates spinning in the air. And I don't know of
Right.
any other analogy to really utilize for this. It's not every day that you have this many options that could create such pressure on oil prices, down, up, or sideways.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, oil, the price of oil is a balancing act between all the factors, these and many, many more factors, right? It's the Middle East, it's US economy with supply and demand. That calculus, that balance is kind of like a scale, right? Every day there's new news, the scale is rebalancing and it's shifting one way or another based on the news of the day and based on how that news could potentially change that balance of supply and demand. The Middle East obviously could make things go higher if that balance tips. If Iran retaliates in a significant way, there's more risk that potentially oil prices or oil supply could be impacted out of the Middle East. There's potential that the violence could spread. So there's constantly a lot of what ifs, and that's kind of what determines where oil prices settle. Now, oil today settled a little bit under $73 a barrel because for most of the day, a lot of those economic concerns, the anxiety over the economy was overweighing the potential of a retaliatory strike from Iran. So that calculus will probably change tomorrow, or it'll change whenever Iran decides, if they do decide to launch a retaliatory strike. So where that leaves us, Matt, is that gas prices are falling. And, my read, having to put on a little bit of a geopolitical hat in these instances because Iran has, some pretty significant connections to oil. I do expect that they'll retaliate. I will point out, though, that Israel has been able to penetrate through their air defenses twice with drone attacks. They've, from what I read, a bomb was placed in Tehran. That's one of the bombs that went off to target, I think it was the leader of Hamas. So Israel has showed its ability to penetrate deep inside Iran, and I wonder if that's going to affect how Iran responds. If they know Israel can penetrate into the midst of their country, they may be choosing to have a bit more restraint in how they respond. So all of this is going to go back to what you and I pay at the pump. Although I will say, I don't know, Matt, about you. You're well versed in areas of Florida and Kentucky where you live, probably St. Louis. The one thing that is, changes across the country, when kids go back to school, because that has a profound impact on when those summer vacations are done, when demand starts to decline. People no longer have the freedom to vacation and consume gasoline once their kids go back to school, right? It's kind of like the last hurrah. Labor Day is the last hurrah. But I know some schools in Florida, I believe, are starting in the next 2 weeks. And I know in the Great Lakes here, about the second or third week in August is really when when schools go back into session. And one note on that, Gas Buddy gasoline demand data, which I share on Gas Buddy Guy on X, we did see the highest demand for the US so far this year happened in the week that just ended on the 3rd of August. We model gasoline demand at almost 9.3 million barrels a day. And this is normal. The last week of July, first week in August is generally the inflection where gas demand peaks. And now, as we get deeper into August, Matt, schools reopen and those road trips are generally starting to wind down.
Yeah, I know. For example, here in Kentucky, most schools start this week. Missouri,
Wow.
you're right. It's like Michigan. It starts, basically that third week of August. Very few school districts still start after Labor Day across the U.S. It's kind of unfortunate, but, it is what it is.
Michigan
But
was
yeah.
one of those states that made
Mhm.
it a state requirement, and then they changed it within a couple of years because they realized that if you have a bad winter, you're going to be pushed well into June to make up
Yep.
that minimum, 180 days.
Yep. That's exactly right. So, yeah, that's pretty much what happens. But yeah, Kentucky schools I know are starting this week in one form, fashion, or another, pretty much across the entire Commonwealth as well. So there's a lot there. All right. So we have that potential upside, if you will. Downside,
Yep.
if you're a student, you don't want to go back to school. You you want to hang out. But an upside on fuel prices, because as you're talking about, the lower demand and all of those attributes. So do you think that some of that could potentially be offset by some of the geopolitical and other aspects, or delay the fall in price points? I mean, this doesn't look like it. You almost kind of question whether or not things are
Yeah.
going to behave as they in a normal fashion. Normally in the fall months, the price goes one direction or the other. We have a lot of gray area right now as to exactly what we think may happen. So it's really tough for you right now to try to predict anything that makes it look like it. I don't
Well,
envy. I don't envy you.
and by the way, we're basically been bouncing around in this mid $3 range. Prices are down a nickel from last week. They're down a nickel from a month. We've kind of been stuck, Matt, in this range of 345 to 355 for like the last month and a half. To your point, though, as we move forward, I think there is still a little bit more downside risk than there is upside risk, just because we are getting close to the end of the summer. It's kind of like, everyone knows the writing's on the wall. U.S. gasoline demand is going to start dropping here as people start going back to school and getting into those normal 9 to 5 routines, dropping their kids off. So there's not a whole lot of upward potential, Matt. Even if there is a significant strike in Iran, I think that would be temporary. I think the thing that does keep me up still is obviously if we have a hurricane and tremendous violence in the Middle East, then we could go up. But if we go back to, say, the Gas Buddy 2024 fuel outlook to kind of get in the mindset of what we were thinking back then, this is largely where we are today. Kind of what we anticipated for the Labor Day weekend. The national average, as I just pointed out to you, is 345 a gallon, and if you look, our Labor Day forecast was in a ballpark of 332 to 363. So we are literally kind of right on par with what we anticipated for Labor Day. Now, there could be some downside, as I mentioned. There could be upside, and we tried to figure that in. We tried to add that into our calculus at the start of the year. And if we go back to the month-by-month average, Matt, for August, we expected a range of 328 to 392 with an average of 360. Now, right now, we're below that. All it takes, though, is some Middle East violence peppered with a hurricane for us to get right back there. But where I'm going is that where we are is pretty much kind of right where we expected. You'll notice as we get into September, the range on prices starts to decrease, right? The overall difference between high and low tends to go down. So
Yeah.
once we get through August, Matt, I think I wouldn't say smooth sailing. There might be some, if you're on a Michigan road or Illinois road, there's a lot of bumps in the road. So there's going to be a few potholes, if you will, but all in all, we are on our way towards a cheaper third and fourth quarter. And by the end of the year, right, Matt, I think it's your favorite number or your second favorite number. We're not going to go down to $1.99, but hopefully by the end of the year, $2.99.
I want you to know that I paid $2.99 for gas on Saturday here
Oh,
in
there
where
you
I'm
go.
at.
Well, and
So
by the way, there's a couple of states that are probably going to get down to that here in the next couple of days. In fact, let me share this graphic. Look at Oklahoma just joined again. Oklahoma's averaged 2.99 a gallon, Louisiana at 2.98, Mississippi at 2.91. Texas, you're up next, and that could happen here later today. There's a bunch. Look, Matt, there's 4 other states that are within 10 cents. So
yeah.
we're probably going to get there. But again, I think we've kind of reiterated the risk is there in August for some of these external factors to potentially line up.
Now,
So,
let me throw one other thing out there. There's, in fact, the Federal Reserve president in Chicago made the comment
yeah,
that if the economy does start to teeter toward a recession, quote, we'll fix it, unquote, indicating a drop in interest rates and other aspects, indicating that they have tools in the tool belt to work on that in a fairly
right.
quick fashion. In fact, there's even talk of an emergency rate cut that would be taking place prior to the normal meeting, which I believe will be taking place in September. So if they do drop interest rates, if I remember correctly, that could tell me if I'm wrong, but would that put pressure on oil prices to start moving in an upward trajectory?
It could. The question is it a cut too late, or is Wall Street going to read through the lines and say, "Oh crap, it's too late"? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it depends. You know, there's going to be a lot of people that concentrate on every word change in the FOMC minutes, and FOMC talking about the
Right.
meeting that. So there's a lot of people that are going to pick up on every minute little detail change or little word change and try to get a some sort of advance on the change. I think we all know a cut in interest rates it's coming. If they do it before September, Matt, it's kind of going to be like headlines over the weekend that we saw that Warren Buffett liquidated like half his position in Apple.
Yep.
Everyone knows he's been a pretty smart investor. So if you noticed a lot of the stories on Apple stock today, it was, what does Warren Buffett know that we're all missing? So I think that's the question you'll see from Wall Street. If Jerome Powell and the Fed cut interest rates before September, that could be dangerous too, because if you
Yeah.
cut before, there may be something happening that the market's not aware of, and then everyone's like, "Oh crap, did I miss something?
Yeah.
Are things
What's
worse?"
getting ready to happen?
So, I mean, hey,
Yeah.
when you see the stock market sell off, the Nasdaq I think was down what, over 1,000 points at one point earlier today. So,
Yeah, yeah. The Dow was down. I'm looking at a third screen over to my right here, but over 1,100 points for the Dow
wow,
Jones Industrial. By the way, Japan's Nikkei has
yeah, I
seen
saw
its
that.
biggest drop since its 1987 Black Monday.
Wow,
That's
October
something.
1987. That's a
Yeah,
long time ago.
that's that gives you a moment of pause
Yeah.
to hear something along. I mean, that's a long time ago. So that's something to keep a watchful eye on, which we will certainly do right here, and of course pass all that information along, how it could impact prices at the pump, uh, barring any major situation developing in the Middle East and other aspects that could apply pressure one way or another. How are you seeing prices really moving in the next 5 to 7 days or so?
I think most of us will continue to see gentle decreases. I think the Great Lakes will continue to see decreases. The caveat's always price cycling markets because they're particularly sensitive. Later this week that gets in terms of it. It could be a factor after we've had this conversation. The price cycling markets are the first to generally react, and price cycling markets, I'm talking about areas like Florida, Texas, the Great Lakes. There's even some individual cities, St. Louis, Kansas City, tend to engage in price cycling when prices seem to be on a downward trajectory and they suddenly jump back up. So that's what we're talking about, price cycling markets. For those that don't know what it really looks like, what a price cycling market looks like, to know one, all you really have to do is look at the daily chart. If you go to gasbuddy.com and look at a daily chart, I'm
Mhm.
going to show you what a price cycling market looks like. That's this right here. This is a price cycling market. So if you want to know if you're in a price cycling market, just type in a city. Let's type in Birmingham, Alabama. We'll see that Birmingham is not really a price cycling market. So that's the difference between a price cycling market and a non-price cycling market. That probably, I mean, look at these constant ups and downs. So
Yeah.
again, bottom line, Matt, if you're in a price cycling market, you probably don't have a whole lot to worry about because most of those price cycling markets are in the Great Lakes. I think
It's
most of
happening
us,
more and more here in Kentucky and the upper
yeah,
South. I've noticed
it
it in
is.
Tennessee. I'm noticing
Yep.
it in Kentucky.
It,
I'm
it,
not
is, it
liking
is
it.
expanding. I think even Denver, Colorado sees price cycling. So if you're in one of those markets, what I'm saying, not that prices will go up, but if there is some disruption or attack in the Middle East and oil shoots up, it's those markets where you generally see gas prices reflected the quickest after such an event. But I think for the majority of us, Matt, gas prices will keep going down this week.
All right. Well, I tell you what, we will be monitoring everything when it comes to the Middle East, hurricanes, you name it. We will be keeping a very, very watchful eye on it and exactly what happens on Wall Street as well. Will the Fed drop interest rates, which could create more pressure? It's all stuff we're going to have to find out together, but we will certainly analyze it right here on Over a Barrel. And for myself, along with Patrick DeHaan, that's going to wrap it up right here on Over a Barrel. Have a good one.